Richard Harrington sat in his large office, looking at the city below through floor-to-ceiling windows. At 72 years old, he had everything money could buy: a mansion, luxury cars, and a successful real estate company worth millions. But today, something was different. A white envelope sat on his desk, changing everything he thought he knew about his life. "Sir, this letter came for you this morning," his assistant had said, placing it carefully on his desk before leaving. Richard stared at the envelope for a long time before finally opening it. Inside was a simple handwritten note. "Dear Mr. Harrington, my name is Ellie Matthews. I believe I am your granddaughter. My father was David Harrington. I would like to meet you if possible." The paper trembled in Richard's hands. His son David had left home 27 years ago after a terrible argument. They never spoke again. Richard had heard about David's death in a car accident 5 years ago, but hadn't even attended the funeral. He never knew David had a child. "This has to be a mistake, or worse, someone trying to get money," Richard muttered to himself. He picked up his phone and called James, his longtime private investigator. "I need you to check on someone named Ellie Matthews. Says she's my granddaughter. I need to know if she's telling the truth." 3 days later, James returned with a folder. "She's legitimate, sir. Birth certificate shows David Harrington as her father. She's 26 years old, no criminal record. Works as a teacher. Lives alone in a small town about 2 hours from here." Richard studied the photos in the folder. The young woman had David's eyes and smile. Something tightened in his chest as he looked at her face. "Get my car ready," Richard told his driver the next morning. "And don't tell anyone where I'm going." The drive took Richard from the clean city streets to country roads he hadn't traveled in decades. His luxury car felt out of place as they turned onto a dusty road with a sign reading Pine Creek Trailer Park. "Are you sure this is right?" Richard asked his driver, checking the address again. "Yes, sir. Number 17 should be just ahead." The trailer park was small, with about 20 mobile homes in various states of repair. Some looked well kept with small gardens and fresh paint. Others were clearly struggling, with patched windows and missing steps. Richard's driver pulled up near number 17, a faded blue trailer with a small wooden porch. The windows were clean, but the metal siding had rust spots. A potted plant sat by the door, bright with red flowers. "Wait here," Richard told his driver. He adjusted his expensive suit jacket, suddenly feeling very out of place. Several residents watched from their windows as the rich stranger approached the trailer. Richard hesitated at the bottom step, his heart beating fast. What would he say to her? What if she hated him for never being part of her life? What if she only wanted his money? He almost turned back to his car, but something pushed him forward. He climbed the 3 wooden steps and knocked on the door. For a moment, there was silence. Then he heard footsteps inside. The door opened, and Richard found himself looking into eyes exactly like his son's, exactly like his own. "Can I help you?" asked the young woman, curious but friendly. Richard cleared his throat. "Are you Ellie Matthews?" Her eyes widened slightly. "Yes, I am. And you're?" "I'm Richard Harrington. I believe I'm your grandfather." Ellie's hand went to her mouth. For a moment, she just stared at him. Then, to Richard's complete surprise, she smiled and opened the door wider. "I've been hoping you would come. Please, won't you step inside?" Richard stepped inside the small trailer, his tall frame making the space seem even smaller. He had to duck slightly to avoid hitting his head on the low ceiling. The floor creaked under his expensive leather shoes. "Please, have a seat," Ellie said, gesturing to a worn but clean sofa with a colorful handmade blanket thrown over it. "Would you like some tea?" Richard nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He looked around the tiny living space while Ellie went to the kitchen area just a few steps away. The trailer was small but surprisingly neat. Bookshelves lined one wall, packed with books. A small desk sat in the corner with papers neatly stacked on it. "I can't believe you're actually here," Ellie called from the kitchen. The sound of water running and cups clinking filled the quiet space. "I wasn't sure you would come." Richard watched his newly discovered granddaughter as she prepared the tea. She looked so much like David that it hurt. Her hair was the same dark brown, and she moved with the same quick energy his son had. "How did you find me?" Richard asked, finally finding his voice. Ellie returned with 2 steaming cups and sat in a chair across from him. "After my dad died, I found some old photos and papers. There was a newspaper article about you and your company. I recognized the last name, and you looked so much like Dad. Richard took the offered cup, noting it was chipped at the rim. Why did you wait 5 years to contact me? Ellie looked down at her hands. I wasn't sure you would want to know me. Dad didn't talk about you much, but I knew you too had problems. I was afraid of being rejected. The honesty in her voice made Richard uncomfortable. He took a sip of tea to hide his feelings. This is where you live? He asked, changing the subject and looking around again. Ellie smiled. Yes, I know it's not much, but it's home. I've been here 3 years now. A sudden noise made Richard jump. Water was dripping from the ceiling into a bucket in the corner. Sorry about that, Ellie said quickly, getting up to check the bucket. The roof leaks when it rains. I've been saving to fix it, but other things keep coming up. Richard frowned. You work as a teacher, correct? Surely you can afford better than this. As soon as the words left his mouth, he regretted them. Ellie's smile faded slightly. I teach special education at Pine Creek Elementary, she explained, returning to her seat. The pay isn't great, but I love my job. And housing is expensive around here, even with my second job. Second job? Richard asked, surprised. Ellie nodded. I work at the library on weekends. Between both jobs, I make enough to get by. She smiled again, but Richard could see the tiredness in her eyes now. Richard looked around again, seeing the trailer differently. Despite its poor condition, there were touches of care everywhere. Fresh flowers in a simple vase, clean curtains at the windows, a row of small potted herbs on the windowsill. Tell me about your father, Richard said suddenly. About David's life after he left. Ellie's face brightened. Dad was wonderful. He worked hard as a mechanic. He taught me how to fix cars, how to build things. He read to me every night when I was little. He came to every school event. As she spoke, Richard felt a strange mix of pride and regret. His son had become a good man, a good father, and Richard had missed it all. A child's laughter outside broke the moment. Ellie looked toward the window. That's Timmy from next door. He's one of my students. His mom works late, so he often stops by after school for help with homework. Richard watched as Ellie waved to someone outside. Her face was gentle, kind. In this small, leaking trailer, his granddaughter had built a life full of purpose and connection. For the first time in years, Richard Harrington, millionaire developer, felt something was missing in his own life. Please come in, Ellie said, stepping back to let Richard enter her small home. Richard ducked his head as he stepped inside, eyes scanning the tiny living space. The trailer was cramped, with a small kitchen area, a worn sofa, and a narrow hallway leading to what he assumed were bedrooms. But what immediately caught his attention were the walls. Every available space was covered with framed certificates, diplomas, and colorful artwork. Richard stepped closer to examine them. You have a master's degree? He asked, surprised, reading one of the framed diplomas. Ellie nodded. In special education from State University. I graduated 3 years ago. Richard moved to the next frame, which held a certificate naming Ellie Matthews as Teacher of the Year at Pine Creek Elementary. You won an award for your teaching? He asked, his voice softer now. Last year, Ellie said, a hint of pride in her voice. I work with children who have learning disabilities. It's challenging but very rewarding. Richard continued looking at the walls, seeing dozens of colorful drawings clearly made by children. Each one had a small note written at the bottom. Thank you, Miss Matthews. You're the best teacher. I can read now because of you. My students make these, Ellie explained, watching Richard's face. I keep everyone. Richard turned to look at his granddaughter with new eyes. When he had pulled up to the rundown trailer park, he had assumed she was struggling, perhaps unemployed or working a minimum wage job. He had been prepared to offer financial help, to rescue her from poverty. Now he wasn't sure what to think. Why do you live here? He asked bluntly, gesturing around the small trailer. With your education, you could work anywhere. Live somewhere better. For the first time, Ellie's smile faded slightly. Pine Creek needs good teachers. The school district can't pay much, but the children here need someone who cares. Someone who understands their struggles. She walked to a shelf and picked up a framed photo, handing it to Richard. It showed Ellie surrounded by about 15 children of various ages, all smiling widely. "This is my class from last year," she said. "Marco, the boy in the red shirt, couldn't read when he came to me. Now he's at grade level. Sophia, the girl with braids, was so shy she wouldn't speak. Now she's in the school play. They needed someone who wouldn't give up on them." Richard studied the photo, feeling something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Pride? Admiration? He couldn't quite name it. "But surely there are better schools, better districts that need good teachers too," he pressed. Ellie took the photo back, carefully returning it to its place. "There are, but these children don't have many advocates. Most of their parents work 2 or 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. Some of the kids live in trailers worse than mine." She paused, looking directly at Richard. "Dad taught me that true wealth isn't about money. It's about making a difference, about helping others when you can." Richard felt a sudden ache at the mention of his son. What kind of man had David become after leaving home? A man who taught his daughter values that Richard himself had forgotten long ago. "Are you happy here?" Richard asked, genuinely wanting to know. Ellie's smile returned, lighting up her face. "I am. My work matters. I have wonderful neighbors who have become like family. Mrs. Garcia next door bakes bread for me every Sunday. Mr. Wilson down the street fixes my car when it breaks down. We take care of each other." She gestured to a small desk in the corner where neat stacks of papers sat. "I'm working on a new teaching method for children with dyslexia. The school can't afford fancy programs, so I'm creating my own. When it's finished, I'll share it with other teachers in similar situations." Richard looked around the trailer again, but now he saw it differently. What had seemed like poverty now looked like a choice, a deliberate decision to live simply so others could simply live. His granddaughter wasn't trapped in this trailer. She was exactly where she wanted to be, doing work that gave her life meaning. And for the first time in many years, Richard Harrington felt humbled. Richard returned to Ellie's trailer the next day after spending a restless night at the town's only hotel. He couldn't stop thinking about his newfound granddaughter and the simple life she led. He knocked on her door at 10 a.m. as they had agreed. "Good morning," Ellie greeted him with a smile, opening the door wide. "You're right on time." Richard stepped inside, carrying a bag of fresh pastries he had picked up from the local bakery. The trailer looked the same as yesterday, except now he noticed more details. The faded curtains that had been washed many times, the small cracks in the walls carefully filled with putty, the worn spots on the floor hidden under colorful rugs. "I brought breakfast," he said, offering the bag. "That's so thoughtful, thank you," Ellie said, taking the bag to her small kitchen counter. "The coffee's almost ready." Just then, a loud thump came from the ceiling, followed by a steady dripping sound. Ellie quickly grabbed a bucket and placed it under a new leak. "Sorry about that," she said calmly, as if catching falling water in her home was perfectly normal. The rain got worse overnight. Richard watched as she made a note on a small pad stuck to her refrigerator. The paper was titled, "Fix It List," and already had at least 15 items written on it. "Does your landlord know about these problems?" Richard asked, trying to keep the anger from his voice. Ellie shrugged. "Mr. Peterson knows, but he's getting old and doesn't have much money himself. Most people here fix their own trailers if they can." As they sat drinking coffee, a soft knock came at the door. Ellie jumped up to answer it. "Mrs. Garcia, good morning," she said to an elderly woman with gray hair standing outside. "Ellie dear, I'm so sorry to bother you," the woman said, her voice shaking slightly. "My medicine fell behind the refrigerator, and I can't move it myself." "Of course I'll help. Come in and meet my grandfather while I get my tools," Ellie said, gesturing to Richard. Richard nodded politely to the older woman while Ellie grabbed a small toolbox from a cabinet. "Ellie is an angel," Mrs. Garcia told Richard. "I don't know what we would all do without her." "We?" Richard asked. The older woman smiled. "Many of us in the park are older or have health problems. Ellie helps everyone. She fixes things, drives people to doctor appointments, even shares her food when money gets tight at the end of the month." Richard felt something twist in his chest as he watched Ellie prepare to leave. "I'll be back in 20 minutes, she told him. "Please, make yourself at home." After they left, Richard walked slowly around the small trailer. He noticed Ellie's careful budgeting written in a notebook. He saw how she had repaired her clothes instead of buying new ones. The refrigerator, when he opened it, was modestly stocked with basic items, many of them on sale according to the receipts taped to the inside of a cabinet door. When a sudden buzz of the air conditioner was followed by a grinding noise and then silence, Richard frowned. The temperature in the trailer immediately began to rise in the summer heat. Ellie returned 45 minutes later, her face flushed from the heat outside. "Sorry that took so long. Mrs. Garcia needed help with a few other things," she explained, then noticed the silence from the air conditioner. "Oh no, not again." She walked to the old unit mounted in the window and tried pressing several buttons. Nothing happened. "Third time this month," she sighed, wiping sweat from her forehead. She picked up her fix-it list and added a /C to the bottom. "You're not upset?" Richard asked, amazed by her calm reaction. Ellie smiled, though tiredness showed in her eyes. "Getting upset doesn't fix the air conditioner. I'll try to repair it this weekend. For now, we can open the windows." As she pulled up the old window sashes to let in a warm breeze, Richard noticed small calluses on her hands, evidence of someone who worked hard, who fixed things herself, who never complained about the hand life had dealt her. For the first time in decades, Richard Harrington felt ashamed of his wealth and how little he had done with it to help others. "Please, let me take you out to dinner," Richard said, wiping sweat from his forehead in the hot trailer. Ellie shook her head. "That's kind of you, but I already took chicken out to thaw this morning. I plan to make my dad's favorite recipe." She paused, looking at Richard with hopeful eyes. "He always said he learned it from his mother, your wife. Would you like to stay and have dinner here instead?" Richard felt a lump form in his throat. "Margaret's lemon chicken, with rosemary potatoes?" Ellie's face brightened. "Yes, that's the one. You remember it?" "I haven't had that meal in over 30 years, Richard said quietly. "Then you must stay," Ellie insisted, already moving to the small kitchen area. Richard watched as his granddaughter moved efficiently in the tiny space. She pulled out well-used pots and pans, carefully measuring ingredients that she took from nearly empty containers. Nothing went to waste. She saved even the smallest bits of vegetables, placing them in a container in the freezer. "That's for stock," she explained when she caught him watching. "Dad taught me never to waste food." As she worked, Richard noticed her wince slightly when reaching for items on high shelves. "Are you in pain?" he asked. "It's nothing," Ellie said quickly. "Just an old sports injury from college." Richard wasn't convinced, but he didn't push. Instead, he asked about her teaching job, and Ellie's face lit up as she talked about her students. "They're amazing kids," she said, chopping vegetables. "Most people only see their disabilities, but I see their gifts. Like Timmy next door, he struggles with reading, but he can build incredible things with his hands. And Maria, who can't speak but draws pictures that tell stories better than words ever could." As Ellie turned to check the chicken, Richard noticed a stack of papers on the counter that she had tried to cover with a dish towel. The corner of one paper was visible, a medical bill with red "past due" stamped on it. When Ellie stepped outside to pick fresh herbs from her small container garden, Richard carefully looked at the papers. His eyes widened at what he saw. Medical bills totaling over $15,000, and a letter from a doctor strongly recommending surgery for a shoulder injury. He quickly returned the papers when he heard Ellie coming back inside. "Almost ready," she said cheerfully, sprinkling fresh herbs over the chicken. During dinner, which tasted exactly as Richard remembered from decades ago, he carefully brought up the subject. "I noticed you seemed to be in pain earlier. Is everything okay?" Ellie's smile faltered slightly. "It's nothing serious." "Ellie," Richard said gently, "I saw the medical bills." Her face flushed. "That was private." She set down her fork, looking embarrassed. "I hurt my shoulder in a car accident 2 years ago. The doctor wants me to have surgery, but I can't afford to take time off work. My students need consistency, and the school has trouble finding substitute teachers who know how to work with special needs children." "But you're in pain," Richard said. Ellie shrugged, then winced at the movement. "The pain medication helps on bad days, and the kids are worth it." "What about your health insurance?" "It covers some, but not enough, and there's the 6 weeks recovery time." She smiled sadly. "Teachers don't get paid if they don't work." Richard sat back, stunned by her sacrifice. He'd made business decisions all his life based on profit and loss. Here was his granddaughter making decisions based on the needs of others, even when it hurt her. Tell me about these students of yours, he said, wanting to understand what could inspire such dedication. As Ellie spoke about each child, their challenges, their victories, their small daily progress, her eyes shone with pride and love. Despite her tiny home with its leaking roof and broken air conditioner, despite her physical pain and financial struggles, she radiated a kind of happiness Richard had never known. For the first time, the millionaire wondered if he was the poor one in this relationship. The next morning, Richard sat in his hotel room staring at his phone. He had made a decision during the night. With a determined sigh, he called his assistant. "Cancel all my meetings for the next 2 weeks," he told her. "Something important has come up." After hanging up, Richard drove to Ellie's trailer. When he arrived, she was already leaving for work, a heavy bag of books over her good shoulder. "Grandfather, I didn't expect to see you this early," she said, surprised. "I'd like to see where you work," Richard said simply. "If that's okay." Ellie hesitated, then smiled. "Of course. You can follow me in your car." 20 minutes later, Richard pulled into the parking lot of Pine Creek Elementary School. The building was old, with peeling paint, and a playground with outdated equipment. It looked nothing like the private schools his company had built in wealthy neighborhoods. Inside, Ellie led him to her classroom. Richard was surprised by how small it was, yet how cheerful she had made it. Colorful posters covered walls with cracks in them. Old desks were arranged in a circle rather than rows. A reading corner had pillows that looked handmade. "The school doesn't have much money for supplies," Ellie explained, noticing his gaze. "Most of this I bought myself or made." Before Richard could respond, a small boy ran into the room. "Miss Matthews, I finished my book last night." He stopped when he saw Richard. "Who's the old man?" Ellie laughed. "Timmy, this is my grandfather." "Grandfather, this is Timmy from next door." The boy studied Richard. "You're tall, and your watch is shiny." Throughout the day, Richard sat quietly in the back of the classroom, watching Ellie teach. He saw how she adjusted her methods for each child. For some, she was gentle and patient. For others, firm but kind. All the children clearly adored her. During lunch, the principal stopped by. "Miss Matthews, the school board rejected our request for new textbooks again, and they're cutting the special education budget next year." Richard watched Ellie's face fall slightly before she composed herself. "We'll make it work, Mr. Lopez. We always do." After school, Richard followed Ellie to the town library where she worked her second job. For 4 hours, he watched her shelf books, help patrons, and lead a reading group for children whose parents worked late. By the time they left, it was dark. Ellie looked exhausted but smiled when a little girl hugged her goodbye. "You do this every day?" Richard asked as they walked to their cars. "Not every day, just Mondays, Wednesdays, and Saturdays," Ellie explained. "And the other days?" "Tuesdays I tutor students who need extra help. Thursdays I volunteer at the senior center. Fridays I usually help neighbors with repairs." Richard shook his head in amazement. "When do you rest?" Ellie laughed. "Sundays, sometimes." Back at the trailer park, Richard noticed an elderly man struggling to climb his porch steps with a grocery bag. "Excuse me," Ellie said, rushing to help him. Richard followed, taking the heavy bag from the man's hands. "Thank you, Ellie," the man said gratefully. "And thank you, sir." "This is my grandfather," Ellie introduced. "Grandfather, this is Mr. Peterson, our landlord." Richard raised an eyebrow, recognizing the name of the park owner Ellie had mentioned. After helping Mr. Peterson inside and declining his offer of coffee, they returned to Ellie's trailer. "He seems nice," Richard commented. "He is," Ellie said. "He tries his best, but he doesn't have money for big repairs. Most of the residents here are elderly or on fixed incomes." That night in his hotel room, Richard couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about all he had seen: the school with peeling paint, the eager children, the tired but proud landlord, and most of all, his granddaughter who gave so much of herself to others. For the first time in decades, the millionaire felt connected to something more important than money. He felt connected to people, real people with real struggles and real joy. And for the first time in years, he missed the humble warmth of family that wealth had never been able to buy. #Millionaire discovers his granddaughter lives in an old trailer when he steps inside. He's shocked. #Part 7. The decision. Richard sat at the small desk in his hotel room early the next morning. Papers were spread out before him, and his phone showed that he had already made several calls despite the early hour. His driver waited outside, ready for the day's tasks. "Yes, I understand the price," Richard said firmly into his phone. "And yes, I want the work to begin immediately. Money is not an issue." He hung up and checked another item off his list. For 3 days, Richard had been absent from Ellie's life, telling her he needed to handle some business matters. In truth, he had been very busy indeed, but not with his usual real estate deals. At exactly 10 a.m., Richard's car pulled up to Pine Creek Elementary School. The principal, Mr. Lopez, was waiting outside as requested. "Mr. Harrington, it's an honor to meet you," Mr. Lopez said, extending his hand. "Let's talk in your office," Richard replied, following the nervous principal inside. Meanwhile, Ellie was teaching her class, unaware of her grandfather's presence in the building. As she helped a student with a math problem, the classroom door opened. Mr. Lopez stepped in, looking unusually excited. "Miss Matthews, could you step into the hallway for a moment?" Confused, Ellie asked her aide to watch the class and stepped outside. Her eyes widened when she saw Richard standing there. "Grandfather, what are you doing here?" Richard's face was serious. "I've been busy these past few days making some arrangements." Mr. Lopez couldn't contain himself. "Ms. Matthews, your grandfather has established a special education foundation for our school. New books, equipment, supplies, and funding for 2 additional special education teachers." Ellie's mouth fell open. "What?" "That's not all," Richard continued. "I've spoken with Dr. Reynolds at Memorial Hospital. They're expecting you next Monday for your shoulder surgery. All expenses covered. And I've arranged for a certified special education substitute to cover your class during your recovery." Ellie's face, instead of showing happiness, grew troubled. "You did what?" "Without asking me." Richard was confused by her reaction. "I thought you'd be pleased." "Mr. Lopez, may I have a moment alone with my grandfather?" Ellie asked quietly. Once the principal left, Ellie turned to Richard, her eyes showing hurt. "You had no right to do this without talking to me first." "I was trying to help," Richard said, surprised by her reaction. "By taking over my life? Making decisions for me?" Ellie's voice trembled. "My whole life, I've taken care of myself. I've worked hard. I've made my own choices. But your shoulder needs surgery," Richard protested. "That's my decision to make." Ellie took a deep breath. "And the school? You can't just throw money at problems without understanding them. The teachers here need regular support, not a one-time rescue from a rich outsider." Richard felt his face grow hot. No one had spoken to him this way in decades. "I was only trying to help," he said stiffly. "I know," Ellie said more gently. "But I don't need your money, grandfather. When I wrote to you, I wasn't looking for a financial rescue. I was looking for family." The word family hit Richard hard. He hadn't been part of a real family since Margaret died and David left. "I don't know how to be family anymore," he admitted quietly. Ellie's expression softened. "No one is born knowing. We learn." Back in his hotel room that evening, Richard canceled most of his arrangements with phone calls just as efficient as the ones he had made that morning. He kept only the school foundation, but restructured it to provide steady, long-term support rather than a dramatic one-time gift. As he put down his phone after the final call, Richard realized something important. For years, he had solved problems by throwing money at them. It was easy, impersonal. But Ellie didn't want his money. She wanted something he wasn't sure he still knew how to give: his time, his presence, himself. For the first time in decades, Richard Harrington faced a problem that his millions couldn't solve. 1 month had passed since Richard's failed attempt to fix Ellie's life with money. Now he stood on the porch of a small but neat house just 3 blocks from Pine Creek Elementary School. It wasn't the mansion he was used to, just a modest 3-bedroom home with a small yard, but it was his. Or rather, it would be his home whenever he visited town, which he planned to do often. Richard took a deep breath and knocked on Ellie's trailer door. When she opened it, he noticed her arm was in a sling. "You had the surgery," he said, surprised. Ellie nodded. "Last week. The school worked out a schedule with substitute teachers, and Mrs. Garcia has been bringing me dinner." She stepped back to let him in. What brings you by? I thought you went back to the city. I did, but I'm back now. Richard handed her a small envelope. This isn't money, he added quickly, seeing her hesitation. It's an invitation. Ellie opened the envelope and read the card inside. Dinner at 17 Maple Street, tonight at 6 o'clock? What's at 17 Maple Street? My new house, Richard said. Well, my second home. I still have my place in the city for business, but I bought a house here. I thought maybe we could start over. Ellie's eyes widened. You bought a house here? In Pine Creek? Richard nodded. It's not much compared to what I'm used to, but it's close to the school, and it has a good roof. He smiled slightly. No buckets needed when it rains. That evening, Ellie arrived at the modest house on Maple Street. Richard greeted her at the door, looking strangely nervous. Welcome, he said, stepping aside to let her in. Dinner isn't fancy. I'm still learning to cook for myself. Ellie looked around in amazement. The house was simply furnished, nothing like what she would have expected from a millionaire. Family photos covered one wall, old pictures of Richard and his late wife, of David as a boy, and even a few school photos of Ellie that she recognized from her father's collection. How did you get these? She asked, touching a picture of herself at age 10. James, my investigator, found them in storage. David kept everything. Richard's voice grew soft. I should have known what a good father he became. During dinner, a slightly overcooked but earnest attempt at lasagna, Richard explained his plans. I'm stepping back from daily operations at my company. My VP can handle things. I joined the school board here. They were quite surprised. And I'm taking a woodworking class at the community center. Woodworking? Ellie asked, surprised. Richard nodded. Your father loved building things with his hands. I never understood that until now. I thought I'd try it. After dinner, Richard handed Ellie another envelope. Inside was a legal document. The David Harrington Memorial Scholarship, she read aloud. For students pursuing special education careers. She looked up at him. You did this for Dad? For him. For you. For the community. Richard sat down across from her. I've been thinking about what you said, about family, about learning. I want to learn how to be part of this community, how to be your grandfather. Tears filled Ellie's eyes. This means more than any amount of money ever could. In the weeks that followed, Pine Creek residents got used to seeing the tall, well-dressed older man helping at school events, awkwardly attempting repairs at the senior center, and sitting proudly in the front row at Ellie's school programs. The old trailer park gradually improved too. While Richard hadn't bought it outright as he first planned, he had created a fund for repairs that residents could access, preserving their dignity while improving their living conditions. 6 months later, as Richard and Ellie sat on his porch swing watching neighborhood children play, he realized something remarkable. The wealth that had once defined him now seemed less important than the connections he had made. The millionaire who had been shocked by his granddaughter's humble trailer had discovered something money couldn't buy, the true meaning of family and community. And in that discovery, Richard Harrington had finally found the richest life of all.